Well, hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you. Every week I try to find a topic that I want to learn about because I feel like if I want to learn about it, others will as well. And we've had really good success so far. And I'm actually way outside my comfort zone today. So I'm just going to be upfront with you there because I ran into somebody that is actually an ADHD coach. And at first, I'm like, I don't even know what ADHD is, and I know that we probably joke about it at times, and it's probably not very funny, although we think it's funny. So I just want to unpack that today. I'm honored to be hanging out with Elle O'Flaherty. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. You're the founder of Interlace Solutions Coaching, public speaker, trainer, and ADHD coach. I've never met an ADHD coach before. So thank you so much for jumping on today. And as I shared with you before we jumped on, I know very little about this. So I want to start from like a 101 level because I feel this is a really important topic. And before you turn this off, if you're listening because you say it might not apply to me, it's possible and highly likely somebody on your team, one of your clients, somebody in your circles has ADHD. And there's certain ways to deal with it. And I really want to unpack that today. So thank you, Elle, so much for jumping on with us today.
Of course. So just to give you a little background,
Yeah, for sure.
ADHD it stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, which is not a great name. We don't have a deficit of attention, but rather a difference. We have a different brain wiring so that we take up dopamine in a different way than neurotypical people.
Okay.
And what that means practically is about somewhere between 5 and 10% of the population has an ADHD brain. We are, some of our hallmarks are things like a different ability to pay attention, sometimes hyperactivity, sometimes emotional dysregulation. So it really impacts everything from how you focus to how you sleep, and including everything in between. Like sometimes some of us are clumsy. Um, it's as impactful as autism spectrum disorder, which people tend to be more familiar with.
Sure.
And it's really interesting because it also brings this huge amount of creativity, outside the box thinking. And you can see that where you find us. So we are about 300% more likely to be entrepreneurs than neurotypical folks. We are 23% of lawyers and a hugely overrepresented in emergency rooms, doctors and nurses and all that good stuff. So as a result of this brain wiring, we're very action oriented, and we are really, really good in an emergency. If the zombie apocalypse comes, like, you want us on your team.
Wow. Well, that's good to know. Holy cow. Well, thank you for sharing that. There's a ton there. So I kind of want to start with, I guess, I want to try to reprogram myself in this, and you use the words brain wiring. So
Mhm.
is that kind of like, and so actually before I ask you this question, I'm assuming it sounds like you have this ADHD. Is that something that is in your world?
Yes, I'm very proudly a member of the community, and I actually attribute my success to it.
Okay. And you're an attorney, so you're in that 23% piece, right?
Yep,
So
absolutely.
that's awesome. So yeah, so as we start here for people listening, so if I don't know anybody on my team, if they have this or don't, I mean, is this an undiagnosed in a lot of areas, or do most people that have it know that they have it? How do you kind of feel on that part of it?
So that's a great question. About 80% of people who have ADHD have not been diagnosed.
Oh,
So
wow.
most of us
Okay.
aren't formally diagnosed. Some of those people, of course, have their suspicions. But the other reason you might not know people on your team have it is ADHD is covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so we're a protected class. However, only about 30% of folks with ADHD will ever disclose. Some people to anyone, but certainly most people do not disclose at work because
Okay.
it faces huge, huge stigma and discrimination.
Wow. Okay. So we're already fighting an uphill battle here. So we have something that we have a brain wiring that we're either afraid to share with people, or we feel like the positives of sharing it don't outweigh the negatives of sharing it, is what I'm hearing you say. Is that correct?
Yes, I would say the reaction of neurotypical people don't
Okay.
outweigh the positives, because
Okay.
one study that I read showed that about half of people who disclosed then went on to face either firing, being passed over for a promotion, or their accommodation not even being met.
Wow.
So there's huge downsides.
Sure. So was your attorney world, your attorney life? I mean, were you representing people in this? Was that part of your life, or did this come about after? How does the attorney piece fit in for you?
Good question. No, I did not represent anyone with ADHD. I worked on international trade law, and I myself never disclosed.
Okay.
Um, and I work with a lot of actually associates and partners at law firms, and the vast majority of them tell me that they've never met anyone who has disclosed they have ADHD, despite us being more than 1 in 5.
Sure.
Um, and so this came about because I was not really hugely happy in my legal career. It wasn't a good fit for me. And so I made this pivot to coaching and speaking. And it's just been, once as an ADHD person, you find your thing that captures your interest.
Sure.
Uh, it's, we become the superstars. We can work for hours and hours, and not even realize it. And it's just incredibly life changing.
So then, how does Interlace Solutions coaching fit in? Are you coaching people that have ADHD? Are you out there raising awareness for us that don't feel we have it? Where does that fit in? Where does Interlace fit in then into this?
It's both, for sure. On the one hand, my major mission of speaking to groups is to get more information out there and understanding of ADHD. With coaching, we are executive coaches. So we work with certainly people who are senior and executive level without ADHD. But when we're working with ADHD clients, there are really two huge components to it. One is most adults with ADHD have very negative self talk and have really received the message that we don't fit into society and that there's something wrong with us. So, undoing a lot of that. And then the second piece is teaching them how to work with their brain,
Okay.
because I kind of think of it like I'm left-handed. And if you've ever tried to use a can opener as a left-handed person, it is mechanically impossible and incredibly frustrating.
Yep.
But the first day I ever had a left-handed can opener, it was everything suddenly became easy, no problem. So I liken it to I am giving people their own left-handed can opener that works for their
Sure.
brain.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I'm left-handed as well, and it's crazy how little things like scissors for me are like,
Uh,
impossible to even pretend to use, and you never can cut on the line, and people are like, "What's wrong with you?"
yep, it's
So,
exactly the same. And let
wow.
me see your membership card. Do you have a smear on the back of your left hand
Oh
from
my
like?
gosh, all the time, right? Well, what's even worse now is I bought one of those Remarkables, and it's like a
Oh yeah.
tablet and you write it. Well, that is, I mean, that now I'm kind of, doing all this gymnastics because but yeah, so enough of our left-handed woes, right? But I think, it's interesting. So in full disclosure, I would have never have known that you have this brain wiring that's different than mine. So
Hmm.
how did you, I mean, at an early age, did you notice this? Was it something that you found later? How did that come about for you?
Good question. I wasn't diagnosed formally until I was an adult. Generally, girls in the South in the 80s, ADHD did not exist for us. But I did know, of course, that there were things that were different. We
Okay.
tend to have social differences and just, lots of things. The reason you probably can't tell is, especially as a woman in the South, I was very much socialized to sit still and make eye contact and to do all the neurotypical things. We call that masking. It uses a ton of energy.
Okay.
Um, and so, yes, I am pretty successful at appearing neurotypical, but absolutely. The other thing is ADHD, there's three different kinds and
Okay.
they show up in different ways. Most people picture a 7-year-old boy who's like bouncing off the walls of their classroom. That is hyperactive type.
Okay.
There's also a combination type, which is what I have. It's the most common. And then there's one that is much more sort of a internalized. And so those are like your daydreamers and your people who are kind of forgetful, things like that.
Okay.
So it doesn't always look like a 7-year-old bouncing off the walls.
Well, thanks for that clarification. I didn't even know there were 3 different kinds. So I want to like, this is like as vulnerable as I can get. So I hope that you're okay with this because I want to ask about it from like a business owner's perspective, because here's what I struggle with. Like, I'm going to use someone in a wheelchair because it's a visual, and I don't even know if handicap limitation, I don't want to offend anybody. I just know it's a visual thing that I see somebody in a wheelchair, and my natural propensity is to like right away go help them. You know, let me push you for a while. Let me help. What can I do? As a business owner, I'm going to be, probably over the top asking that question. I mean, how do we like help you in a way that doesn't offend you, that doesn't like degrade you? Because I really want you to be all that you can be in your world, but I want to understand how I fit, and maybe am I supposed to treat you different? Is there any changes? Help us, give us like a glimpse in for the people listening that may have ADHD people on their team. What do we do? I really want to be helpful, but I don't want to offend. So where do you find that middle ground?
Good question. So, as with any disability, of course, we want to, treat people in the same way and respectfully. And, you made a great example. So, of course, you wouldn't run up to someone in a wheelchair and just start pushing. If they notice that they needed help, then you would help them. With ADHD, the first thing you can do is make it clear that your workplace is disability friendly. So having someone at a senior level, maybe who discloses if they want to, that they're ADHD, having signage up that all differences are welcome, that sort of a thing. Um, Also allowing people to use different tools that are helpful. So things like assigning tasks in writing, which frankly, I think would also be helpful for everyone's brain. um, Allowing people to use noise canceling headphones if they're working in collective spaces, which again is helpful for many people. And allowing those kinds of accommodations. If you had someone who was physically disabled, of course, you would make the accommodations that they need so they can get around and do the job. So it's similar, but the thing is that because there's such a huge stigma here, you
Yeah.
don't want to necessarily ask or assume that someone has ADHD, but
Okay.
doing some of the things and offering some of the things that are helpful, like noise canceling headphones, some of the software and apps out there that are really helpful for productivity, for instance,
Okay.
um, are incredibly helpful just to have as something that anyone can use. And as I said, most people can benefit from a lot of these accommodations.
So so I think back to my team, Elle, and I had 22 people on my team in my last company. So I'm going to use 10% just for easy math. So I'm going to say 2 people on my team statistically had ADHD. Now, nobody ever came to me and said that they had it, because like you said, if 80% of them aren't diagnosed, there's a lot of people that are in it that don't even know that they're in it. So here comes me, the business owner, thinking, okay, 2 of you, in my mind, not not my outside voice. In my mind, I'm like, okay, I probably have this on my team, but if it's either undiagnosed or people are ashamed of it, how do we maneuver through this as a business owner without really, I don't want to do anything illegal. I sure want to recognize, like I said, if it was a physical disability, it's visible, right? I mean, we can see this, so it's not like I don't have to wonder. But I don't want to offend anybody, but I don't want to just let it go like I don't care about it. So what do you suggest for business owners that may think they have somebody on their team that is in this, has the ADHD?
Absolutely. So broadly, I would say make it clear, say it out loud to your team that if anyone needs an accommodation for any sort of disability, physical, and invisible, whatever it might be, that you are
Okay.
very open to that
Gotcha.
and making that a comfortable thing. Specifically, if your team Oh, and of course, if someone discloses that they have ADHD, if you have 15 or more people, you're legally required to make accommodations. But if you're noticing, for instance, that someone is having trouble accomplishing potentially like some of the tasks, we tend to have trouble with things that are mundane and uninteresting because we have an interest-based brain. And
Okay.
so someone's having trouble with those aspects, seeing how you can maybe reassign those aspects, automate them, do, things like that. If they're having trouble with deadlines, for instance, then asking them, so would you want to try an application or something that tends to help people with deadlines? So really it's having good communication, which is always great in the workplace.
Sure.
Um, and noticing what might be helpful to them and offering up those solutions.
But we have to be really careful, like you said, not to ask the question. I mean, I
Mhm.
heard you say, and maybe I misunderstood, but I got the feeling I'm not supposed to ask somebody on my team if they have ADHD.
Correct.
So how do this is where the water gets really muddy for me. And I'm trying to understand because I wanna honor, let's just say it's you're on my team, and I start to notice a couple of things. Again, maybe it's paying attention, maybe it's some sleep things, maybe it's, the deadlines like you talked about. I want to be very sensitive to you, but yet I don't want to, I want to address it. So I'm trying to find that spot of how do you address it, but not. Do you
Mhm.
get HR involved? Do you get a doctor involved? I mean, this is a hard subject for me. So I'm just trying to get some feedback for you. And I'm sure that there's people listening that are really learning as they go here. So how do you approach the person?
Good question. Well, the kinds of things that you were describing are performance based. And as a business owner, that's easier because that's the thing that you would normally address with anyone. So going to that person and recognizing they may not be ADHD, they may not be diagnosed, but going to them and say, hey, I'm noticing that you're having trouble completing this kind of project on time. Being open and honest and saying, I'm curious what's going on, what's making it difficult for you.
Okay.
And I want to come up with some solutions that are going to help you. Um, and then being open to trying a few things. We have entirely interest-based brains, whereas neurotypical people can prioritize tasks based on importance. We do not. So we prioritize tasks based on interest.
Hmm.
Um, and so we have to either naturally be interested or find ways to game things so that they become interesting to us. But helping to let us focus on what like the crux of our work is that does capture our interest and not weigh us down with things like, you know, time and attendance and other boring details that are harder for us can be hugely helpful.
Hmm. So am I better off, Elle, trying to address the group, hoping that anybody that is interested would come forward, as opposed to me meeting with you one-on-one about this? Am I better off, like you said, talking about a disability-friendly workplace and, see what comes out of that? Is that kind of your first step, is to address the group to see if something develops from there?
Good question. So I would do both. I would absolutely, for many reasons, make sure that everyone is aware that you are a disability friendly workplace.
Okay.
At the same time, just as with anyone else that was having a performance issue, I would meet individually with that person. And, I'm sure the same way that you would while managing others, trying to find out what's going on, what's making it a challenge, and then working collaboratively to remove those obstacles. I always think as a manager, that is your number one job, right? Make it so your superstars can perform.
Wow, that's really interesting. I mean, then this is all second nature to you. So this just comes like natural. For me, it's a whole new like world of like, I don't want to offend people. I really want the team to operate at its optimal. And so thinking that you may have to, you know, create different opportunities for different people is probably foreign to some people that are listening. So thank you again for sharing that. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Awesome. So I want to kind of switch this around a little bit, Elle. I want to look at the people that might be listening that may have it and maybe on a team, What tips do you have? Like how did you like, whatever you feel comfortable sharing about your journey? I don't think maybe you did. Did you wake up one day and go, oh my gosh, I think I have this ADHD? Or, how did you get exposed to it? And just for the help of somebody listening that may be in that same boat.
So I think that you made a really interesting point earlier when you were talking about people making jokes about ADHD. ADHD is one of the most discriminated against classes of people.
Sure.
There was a survey I saw that over 90% of neurotypical people have negative associations with ADHD.
Wow.
And I saw it like everyone else did, right? In TVs and movies, we're the butt of the joke. But it also felt true to me. So I knew for a really long time, since I was a kid, that I had it. But the difference was that through my ADHD coach training, I had this real transformation from thinking of ADHD and myself super negatively to having a much, much more positive look at it. And so for people out there who think they might be or are ADHD, as I said, we will be some of your hardest workers and biggest superstars if we find that thing that sparks our interest.
Sure.
So when I talk to ADHD people and they tell me that they're slogging through work, that they have to force themselves to do the work, it tells me they're probably not in the right job.
Okay.
And so trying to find things that are interesting and making the majority of your day focus on those sorts of things, that's when, like Thomas Edison, we believe was ADHD, Albert Einstein. So when people really get in their groove and can work with this highly, highly creative and innovative brain,
Sure.
That's when the magic happens.
So wasn't one of those guys left-handed too, if I remember correctly?
I think Einstein was.
I think so. Oh my gosh. Uh-oh, this is scary. So don't, yeah, no, I'm just curious. So once you kind of suspected that you had that in your life, was there a test involved? Was there some testing? How did that then, what if somebody's listening and they're thinking or curious if they have it, what's kind of the next step there? How do you determine if you have it, if that's something that you want to know about yourself?
Sure. Well, only a mental health professional can diagnose it. So you can get formally diagnosed. And I do think it's a helpful thing to do. There are symptoms checklists online that you can take just to kind of self-assess that tend to be really helpful.
Okay.
But with ADHD, I don't pressure people one way or the other when it comes to medication. I think that's a personal decision, but the gold standard of treatment is considered medication. And then right behind that is coaching.
Okay.
So getting some of those things in your life can really make a huge difference.
Gotcha. Okay. And like you said, I think it's a stigma that is really challenging for people. It's kind of like counseling. I mean, who wants to admit openly that they have to go to counseling or they enjoy counseling or they go to counseling? It's usually one of those things that aren't really talked about. So I'm assuming there are some laws, there are some things that we have to be careful as business owners in what we talk about and what we don't talk about. Is this something that we would need to get our attorney involved with to kind of get a sense of what direction we should take, if any, if we do find somebody on our team that has it, or vice versa, if I do want to share it with my company? Is there some legal ramifications and restrictions here?
Well, there can be. And just to go back to a point that you just made, I hope in this day and age that people are much more open to saying that they are in therapy. I've done therapy for years and it's wonderful. Yeah. I recommend it to everyone. But yeah, as far as legally, yes, there are legal obligations under the ADA.
Okay.
I would guess that most business owners who have any sort of 100 people or more staff have likely done reasonable accommodations before.
Sure.
You can get your attorney involved, certainly. And there, as I said, can be legal ramifications, but generally it's really working with that person and listening to them to figure out what they need. Hopefully any manager worth their salt is already doing this kind of thing to support their team. And so finding out what it is the person needs, what their hurdles are, and how you can overcome them, again, which I'm hoping, when you see a performance problem on your team, Dave, how do you approach that? Do you communicate with them and try to solve the problem?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. You know, the
Yeah, so
difference is though, is I now as I'm thinking about this, I'm like, what if that, what if there, I'm a novice at this as a business owner when it comes to understanding this concept. So if I'm in a performance review, Al, and I'm seeing a drop in performance, or whether it's a drop or it's always been there, whatever, you know, I'm like second guessing myself, wondering, should I have had a wider view of this rather than, let's just be real. If we're in a performance review as the one doing the review, it's easy to say you're lazy, not say it, think it. It's easy to think you're lazy, you don't care, you're not an engaged employee. It's easy to kind of do that. And then
Mhm.
write them off from that perspective. Hey, just work harder, just get here earlier, just do the right thing. I mean, there's super easy, in my mind, simple solutions that are really far from the reality now that we're unpacking this.
Yeah,
So,
and I hope that we're moving away from that kind of a managerial style that's pretty old school, you know? So
yeah,
instead, coming to performance reviews, and hopefully, people are meeting more often about performance than just during an annual review, for instance.
right.
Um, Coming with curiosity and with the mindset that we assuming good intent and that we're both here to do the best we can, I think gets people a lot farther than kind of old school managerial of like, just get here, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, work
Yeah,
harder.
yeah,
Um, so when you come in with that mentality of curiosity and more as how can I help and support you, I think you get a lot farther.
sure. Well, and so you mentioned that I want to kind of do some real world, if you can, if you feel helping us. So if you were on my team and and you said that you had this ADHD, or you thought that you did, or we had I want to find out from you what accommodations you specifically need, so that so the listener can really kind of know examples. Because you talked about like noise canceling headphones, you talked about things getting in writing. Are there things specific to you, Elle, that really are in your wheelhouse that allow you to elevate your performance if we were talking about it from a team perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you from the manager's perspective, I had someone on my team who was ADHD back when I was a lawyer.
Okay,
And yes, that person, first of all, ADHD, just like any other disability, is not monolithic. So you can't sort of say, here's the cookie cutter thing you do for an ADHD person.
sure.
But in general, helping people to focus, anything in that area. So giving them a quiet workspace, letting them work from home, noise canceling headphones, that sort of a thing is very helpful.
Okay.
Also, sometimes some companies have made focus times when you don't schedule meetings, and it allows everyone to be able to focus on their individual
Mm,
work, which is really
okay.
helpful.
Yep.
Um, Other things, because we don't have, sometimes we can have challenges with short-term memory. So being able to get assignments, as I said, in writing, getting people to send out to-dos as calendar invites or I'm sorry, as like calendar dates and deadlines,
Sure.
so that is also something easy to capture.
Okay.
And being open to people, you mentioned that you're using the Remarkable, which I have one too, and I love it. But letting people use things like that, assistive technology, and being open to funding that through your company can be really, really helpful.
Okay.
So it depends on what that individual's needs are, but just, approaching it in a friendly way. I've noticed it's weird. Whether you're reading articles in the newspaper or seeing people talking on LinkedIn, I've noticed that there's this really adversarial relationship between management and staff for some reason, and it's like palpable
Sure.
in the media. I don't know how we got here. In my mind, we're all on the same team, and trying to work collaboratively is really the way to make progress. So hopefully, having that mindset and really being proactive about noticing and trying to help people
Yeah.
is, in my mind, the best way to go.
Well, it's so funny that you say that, Elle, because I think of my first job making pizzas at Shakey's Pizza when I was 15 years old.
Mhm.
And I tell you what, 100 years ago, when that was me doing that, it was one of those things that there was a boss and he told you what to do, and that was the boss employee. There was no camaraderie much. There really wasn't much of that. There was, hey, you know what, you punch in at 5, and by 5 o'clock you better start making pizzas, and you don't screw around. I mean, there was all this, right, the heavy duty stuff going on. So I think about my dad and his career too. This is kind of the same way. The boss was in the corner office and he didn't come out much, and until he was going to yell at somebody, and then everybody got nervous. So I think that's been
Was that
going on.
person inspiring? Did you want to follow them and do extra things for them?
Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely. Right. You wanted to stay as far away from them as possible, and just let me do my job. But, and again, I don't know if that's, where it came from, but it feels like, for me personally, those are the two examples that I think about. And, it's just, it just has to change. We have to work through, trying to engage our team in different ways, which is so cool. As we start to land today, I want to talk about the DISC for a minute, because you took a DISC assessment. You were, and we do a lot of work in that. And I wanted to ask you, excuse me, because on my assessment, ours are pretty similar. Really high I, which is a really high people person. But it says, like, for instance, in my assessment, that I get bored easy. And I started to kind of correlate some of the things that you were saying to some of the things that come up in my assessment. For me, I would struggle to do the same job day in and day out. I mean, I don't even think I could. If I had to put the same part in the same spot all day, every day, I mean, my brain's not built that way. So, I mean, for somebody that I don't know if there's intensities of ADHD, or if that comes into play where you could have some symptoms of it, but not necessarily, have the condition. So I'm just curious, what do you share with people when they're like looking at their life and going, maybe I do, maybe I don't? How do you help that person?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there is certainly a spectrum of how much people are impacted by ADHD. It's something, if you're curious, I do highly recommend looking at some of the symptoms inventories, or
Okay.
perhaps talking to somebody. The other interesting thing is, because our brain it's much more similar to sort of fight, flight, and freeze brain, where we're very action oriented.
Right.
When neurotypical people are under stress, they start having some of the same symptoms, which is interesting. But I always say that when I'm teaching these skills, I can't imagine many neurotypical people who wouldn't also benefit from learning ways to be more productive, to be more,
Sure.
improve their performance. And so it is a distinct brain wiring. It is distinctly different than neurotypical folks. But if if what we're talking about is starting to feel maybe a little close to home, especially those of us who are Gen X or older, many of us have gone undiagnosed. And I do
Yeah.
encourage people to take a look at it if they think they might be.
Yeah. Well, and so if you're listening, I can already sense the wall going up of, I don't have it, I'm fine, right? Because who wants to have another? I mean, I don't know about you, but man, watching TV and the commercials, 4 out of 5 commercials are about some disease I never even knew existed, and now they have a solution for it already. So there's so much of that, like, awareness out there in the world. And so I can sense the resistance in my own brain. I'm fine. You know what? I'm fine. It's fine, right? Whether it's a blind spot that I have, whether it's, I don't want to get outside of my comfort zone and start learning about that. So I just want to encourage anybody listening to, do some discovery work on your own. You don't necessarily need to tell anybody anything, but I really like your symptom inventory that you said. So I'm assuming you just Google something like that, and then there's a list of potential things that are symptoms that maybe you'd want to check into. Is that kind of how that works?
Yeah, my favorite one was actually created by Harvard Medical School and the WHO. And if you're open to it, I'd love to send you a link so you can put it in
Yeah,
the show notes.
sure,
Um,
absolutely love it.
yeah, and It's funny. This is one of the reasons why I disagree with the characterization that ADHD is a disability. Um, it's just a different ability, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And the gene that we think is responsible for it has been positively selected throughout all of human evolution, meaning that we are actually a very critical part of human survival. And NIH here in the United States did some modeling showing that having a minority of people who have ADHD characteristics is critical for survival in early human groups.
Mm.
And so we actually improved the outcomes of groups, and we were doing pretty great up until the Industrial Revolution, when people were like, "We should shove you in cubicles," which, frankly, I don't think is possibly good for anyone. But
Yeah.
um,
No
so
kidding.
I don't see it as a negative, and I really wish we could start moving the needle on portraying it that way.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, and again, it's so hard. Like for me as a novice, I don't know what to call it. I don't know how to address it. I sure
Oh,
don't
sure.
want to irritate people, offend people. I love the brain wiring thing because in my mind, DISC shows 4 different personality styles, and each one, their brain's wired a little different. And that's what happens. Now, again, I don't want to minimize this on, and from that perspective. I just think if we do look at it as a brain wiring, it gets away from, like you said, the disability, it gets away from the stigma. And then we just
Mhm.
figure out how do we, excuse me, how do we deal with this individual? Every individual has a little bit different of a need for what their environment is, what their surroundings are. Why not be a leader that just maximizes everybody on your team, regardless of how they're wired? I think that's
I
just a
love that.
win-win for everybody. And so I appreciate all that you shared. Excuse me.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, what would your tip of the day be for anyone listening? Maybe it's something that we covered, maybe it's something that's just kind of, put on your heart, but what would you share with somebody listening to this at this point?
Great question. Well, because our brains are so action oriented, the most important thing I can ever teach an ADHD person is just to pause before they act. Take a moment, pause, think about what they're doing. And especially if they're able to just either choose, and that's what I really, really encourage people to do, pause, say, wait, what am I doing right now? Is this the most important thing? Am I choosing to do this, or am I just reacting? That can
Sure.
be incredibly powerful.
Wow.
So that's my number one tip, which again is useful for everyone.
Yeah.
Um, but what you were just saying a minute ago about not wanting to offend and all that good stuff, I
Yeah.
will also tell you the secret to ADHD. Um, we also tend to be really, really funny. You know, Robin Williams was ADHD. Lots of comedians are. So
Okay.
we're a fun bunch. Hopefully hard to offend.
Well, that's good. That's great to know because it's hard, you don't know how to address something. That's what I think is so powerful about podcasts like this. I'm able to ask you, an expert, about something that I don't know how to deal with. And because you're in it, that's even better. Your brain is wired differently. So you're able to speak from experience. So
Mhm.
that's so cool. Thank you for all this. My last question is, if somebody's listening today and they want to reach out to you, they want to learn more about what you're doing at Interlace, what's the best way for them to connect with you? Whether it's somebody that feels they may have a wiring question or somebody that has a team that they want to learn more about that. What's the best way for them to connect with you?
Great question. And please, please do. This is my passion and my life's work. So the two best ways are either go to our website, which is www.interlacesolutions.com, or feel free to shoot me an email. My email is elle@interlacesolutions.com. And anything I can do to help this community and help other people become supporters, I'm in.
That's awesome. And Interlace is Interlace. Want to make sure that gets there. It'll be definitely in the show notes for everybody. But wow, Elle, this has been so helpful. Thank you for jumping off the attorney wagon and jumping on this one, and like really, following your passion. And I'm excited to see more from you in the coming days, weeks, months, and years, to be able to minimize the stigma that you guys have with this, unfortunately. And hopefully we can all look at people on our team and just realize that their brain is wired a little different than ours, and we just need to find ways to help them through that, and help them just like you need help. My brain's wired different than hers, so we both need the same amount of help. So thank you again so much for all you're doing.
I really appreciate being here, and thank you for your open-mindedness. I think we might have formed an ally.
That works for me. So I'm going to be on that symptom inventory. So I'm like, I'm already like, So
email me, Dave.
No, thank you. No, I'm just like, hey, I'm happy. You know what? That's the hard thing, is accepting where you're at. And hopefully we can continue to move in that direction, so that there is no, again, stigma to it. That's just a difference of a way that a brain is wired. So again, thank you for everything, and I'm going to keep learning from you.
Thanks, Dave.